If you're looking for some new creative ideas for your 360 camera, this is the video for you. I'll be using the Insta360 X5 along with some new accessories like the ND filters, the mic air, GPS preview remote, and the throw pod. I'm going to take you step by step, showing how I do cinematic camera moves, walking selfies, filming overhead, drone and FPV style shots, creative tripod shots, time lapses at night, time lapses on escalators, and even time lapses in a shopping cart. Alright, so grab your 360 camera and let's get started. And thanks to Insta360 for sponsoring this video. First up, let's talk about the gear. I'll be shooting on the Insta360 X5, which shoots 8K video and 11K time lapse. And now it comes in satin white, which is what you're seeing here. I filmed this shot as well as all the other non-time lapse shots in this video at 8K resolution and 24 frames per second. I'll also be trying out the new ND filter kit, which reduces the light entering the lens, allowing me to use slower shutter speeds and get cinematic motion blur. They snap on the lens like this, and then the X5 auto detects them and adjusts its parameters accordingly. There's an ND16, ND32, and ND64. Take a look at this shot. See the motion blur on the water? It's that motion blur, because of the ND filter, that makes the movement in the shot feel natural. Also, you may have noticed before strange flickering on LCD screens like this, and also flickering of lights. Well, if you use an ND filter and fix your shutter speed, it gets rid of all these visual artifacts. I'll also be using the GPS preview remote, which lets you monitor what you're shooting, as well as recording audio to the X5 with no receiver needed. It also has internal 32-bit float audio recording, and it has other functions for monitoring your sports activities and your other stats. Plus, you can trigger the power and the record of the X5 remotely. This is the throw pod, which is an auto-opening tripod for super quick setups. It's pretty self-explanatory. You just extend the selfie stick and then you drop it to open the tripod feet. It's a lot of fun to use and it's great for quick shooting. And I'll be using my favorite accessory of all time, the extended edition selfie stick. It's 3 meters or about 10 feet long, which lets me do high angle shots that look like a crane or a drone. For editing, I'll be doing some of the edits in the desktop Insta360 Studio app, but the majority of my editing will be done in DaVinci Resolve using the KVR Reframe plugin. This plugin is not as easy to install or use as the Insta360 Studio app, but it does allow me the finest control over the movement in my shots. You're probably going to be using a different software, so the most important thing is just to understand the overall concepts of reframing. Alright, now let's get to the tutorial. We're going to start with some simple stuff and work our way to the more advanced shots. If you just want to film yourself walking with a 360 camera, here's my advice. Use the extended selfie stick instead of the regular one and hold the stick at knee level, basically the same height as if you're walking a dog. This will allow you to use a narrower field of view in your reframing while still keeping your full body in the shot. So there's going to be less fisheye distortion and the shot will look more natural. Whenever I'm shooting with my X5, I'm always on the lookout for interesting shots looking straight up overhead. Sometimes what seems to be a normal or unimpressive scene can be a lot more interesting if you just look up. For this shot in an alley in Hong Kong, I rotated the X5 to put the stitch line between the buildings above me, in the sky where there was less important detail. Then I held my selfie stick just above my head to avoid getting myself in the shot, and I slowly ninja walked forward. And here's the resulting shot. This kind of shot would have been a lot more difficult with a camera on a gimbal because gimbals tend to drift in their framing, but a 360 camera is always locked and facing exactly where you set it. Here's another shot I did walking under a mural painted on the ceiling of a hotel. For this fountain shot, I extended the X5 over the water, faced one of the lenses up at the ceiling, and I put one of the streams of the fountain in the foreground to create parallax as I swung the camera over the water. And for this shot of the statue, I just extended the X5 in front of me and I waved it side to side. I didn't have to take a single step. Then in post, I added a pan in the opposite direction to keep that statue centered, and that made the shot feel like the camera was orbiting the statue. Here's a simple move that can give beautiful results. Just raise up your selfie stick as you follow somebody as they walk to a window and stop. I used the extended edition selfie stick here, and I started with the X5 at a low angle, Then I raised it up to a higher angle while following Kobe to the window. Also, I kept my body as far back as possible to avoid getting myself in the shot. When I reframed the shot, I had to avoid showing myself, both in the back of the frame and also in the reflection in the window. So what I did was I started by panning off to the right a bit, and then I added a tilt up at the end to avoid showing my own reflection. And here's how the reframing looks in the KVR reframe plugin in DaVinci Resolve. I set the keyframes at the beginning and at the end of the shot, and then I just used easing to smooth in between. One more thing I want to talk about here, the lighting is extremely important in a shot like this. Since the background is always in focus, we have to use lighting and contrast to separate our subject from the background. So for instance, look at this take that I did moments earlier when the sun was partially hidden behind the cloud. See how Kobe blends into the background? Now look again at the final take where the edge light from the sun separates her from the background. It looks so much sharper and clearer just because of the lighting. Okay, here's how to do an overhead drone type shot while sitting down. What I did here was first I extended the stick all the way. Then I sat down and I rested the base of the selfie stick on the bench next to me. Then I slowly rotated my wrist to wave the stick and the camera over my head. The resulting shot is this top-down perspective with a smooth camera movement. In reframing, I added a tilt up at the end so that you could see the city in the distance. Notice how I'm ignoring the camera in the shot, so I give the impression that somebody else is operating the camera instead of me. A spiral staircase creates a lot of creative options for a 360 shot. For this one, I had Kobe walk down the stairs while I slowly raised the X5 on the extended edition selfie stick. By moving the opposite direction from Kobe, it added more energy to the shot. This is called counter movement, moving opposite the direction of your subject. And I also made sure to keep one of the lenses of the X5 pointed straight down the entire time to avoid having the staircase cross that invisible stitch line. In reframing, I added some rotation and I added a tilt up to the city at the end. That tilt up was not just for aesthetics. My other reason for doing that was to avoid showing myself in the shot. If you want a really long extension pull, you can combine the extended edition selfie stick with the throw pod, which gives you this monstrosity. This assembly is not officially approved by Insta360 in any way, but it gets some pretty cool results. Here I started directly over Kobe's head and I raised up to reveal the garden maze surrounding her. Here's an advanced FPV drone type move using this extended selfie stick and throw pod combo. Watch closely because it's a bit trickier than it looks. As Kobe ran forward, I walked backwards with the X5. Then I raised up and started walking in the opposite direction. It's like I was drawing a big C shape in the air with the selfie stick. Here it is one more time from a POV perspective. The reframing of the shot was pretty tricky, but basically what I'm doing here is keeping Kobe centered by tilting down and panning to the right, and then tilting back up. You can also do really creative shots with the X5 just by putting it on a tripod. So here's an idea for an opening shot for your video if you happen to have a room with curtains on the windows. I put the X5 on the throw pod and set it down in the center, and then I set my exposure manually. I used the ND16 filter to expose for the bright cityscape in the distance. Then I checked my framing with the GPS preview remote and I triggered record. Then I drew the curtains completely closed and I let them open automatically, and then I walked into the frame and then Kobe walked into the frame after me. Now, since this is a 360 shot, in post, I was able to zoom it and rotate it any way that I wanted without seeing the edges of the frame. So that gave me unlimited options for a seamless intro shot for my video. And if you wanted this to be an ending shot instead of a beginning shot, you would just close the curtains instead of opening them, creating a nice natural fade to black. Here's a fun shot that you can do at a skate park or a bike park. put the X5 on my extended selfie stick, but I left it contracted and just set it on the ground. Then I filmed the guy riding his bike around the rim. Now when you go to reframe it, this shot gets a lot more interesting when you remove all of the lens distortion correction, allowing it to go full fisheye for a 360 field of view. I also tilted it up to 90 degrees, so the reframing is looking straight up. And if you animate the roll parameter, you get this really interesting perspective. Okay, now we're going to take a moment just to talk about the different options for exposure with the X5. I'm going to start by showing you manual exposure, which is what I usually use. On a bright day, I like to expose generally for the brighter parts of the shots, letting the shadows go dark, because that keeps the highlights from overexposing. In this particular shot, I intended for the subjects to be those buildings in the distance, not the foreground. That's why I let the foreground fall into shadows and be very, very dark. Now here's that same shot using auto exposure. Notice how the foreground is properly exposed, but the background is way too bright. Your third option when you're shooting 8K on the X5 is to use adaptive tone, which aims to create a smooth transition between the brighter and the darker parts of the shot. It works pretty well here, but I still personally prefer the dramatic look of the manually exposed shot. However, all of this changes if you reframe the shot differently. For instance, if I wanted to show off more of the foreground, then of course the auto exposure or the adaptive tone would work better. And then here's a side-by-side of all three modes put together. And here's another example where I filmed selfies of myself walking around from bright daylight into the shade. That was manual exposure. Now here's auto exposure. Notice how everything is generally a lot brighter. And here's adaptive tone, which is sort of a middle ground between the look of the manual exposure and auto exposure. My personal recommendation is to use auto exposure when your priority is keeping yourself properly exposed in a selfie shot. And then I recommend using manual exposure when you're exposing more for the environment or when you're working in a tricky lighting situation with a lot of contrast and you want the most control. And then I recommend adaptive tone when you're shooting in changing lighting conditions and you want a more natural and subtle transition in the exposure. Now I'm going to do a quick comparison between Insta360's two new wireless mic options, the Mic Air and the GPS Preview remote. They both connect to the X5 with no external receiver needed. This is the Insta360 Mic Air. It's a tiny little button mic that you can mount using a magnet or a clip or, my favorite, this necklace. And then I put it under my shirt, just like that. Now you're hearing the audio from the Mic Air under my shirt on the necklace, and I'm using the extended edition selfie stick to put the X5 a good distance away from my body so we get this nice natural looking walk and talk vlog. Now for comparison, here's the audio from the GPS Preview remote. So this can attach to my shirt using a clip. So both the GPS Preview remote and the Mic Air are good solutions if you want to do walk and talk vlogs like this. The Preview remote is just a bit bulkier and it doesn't have that necklace attachment, but it has internal recording and you can also use it for other functions such as previewing your video, and it has the additional sports watch functions. Right now I'm filming myself using the ND16 filter on the X5 so you get that motion blur in the water, and I'm also using the GPS Preview remote to capture my audio so you're getting perfect audio while also getting the proper motion blur. 360 cameras are great for time-lapse because you don't have to worry about the framing as long as you have a good angle to shoot from. But you do need to pay careful attention to your camera settings. For these night time lapses, I used the 11K time-lapse mode and I shot at 2-second intervals. This is actually the fastest interval you can shoot at when you're shooting 11K. I used manual exposure and I set my shutter speed to 1 second, which is half the duration of the interval. So if you're doing a 2-second interval, you want your shutter to be 1 second. I used the ND16 filter on the X5, even though it was nighttime, because otherwise the image would have been too bright, so I just needed to darken it to get the right exposure. And then to bring the exposure back up just a little bit, I adjusted the ISO. So to recap, first I set a 2-second interval with the shutter speed of 1 second, and I used the ND16 filter on the lens. And then I adjusted my ISO to fine-tune things and get exactly the right exposure. Then I just set up the X5 on my extended selfie stick on top of the throw pod, creating an ultra tall tripod, and I stood back and let the time lapse go. The really cool thing about shooting 11K time lapses is that you have endless ways to reframe the shot since you can zoom in so far to the image. If you don't have ND filters or you just don't want to use them, you can still get a really nice looking time lapse. You'll just have less motion blur because you'll be using a faster shutter. Here's another time lapse I did without an ND filter. There's still a lot of blur on the cars because they're moving fast. There's just less blur than I would have gotten if I was using the ND. Time lapses aren't just for cityscapes. To create this escalator time lapse, I used the 5.7K mode, which allows a faster half-second interval, and I used the ND64 filter this time. Then I stood behind Kobe on the escalator, and I used her body to hide my hand that was holding the stick. And then we just held perfectly still, and the X5 recorded 2 shots every second, and this is the resulting time lapse. The reason I wanted to use a half-second interval here is because it gave me a much longer time lapse for the same amount of time recorded. Here's another version of the same kind of time lapse, only this time I used a mini tripod and set it down on the steps in front of me on the escalator. And this is the resulting shot. If you want a much more dramatic time warping type of effect, go ahead and use the 11K mode and the 2-second interval on the escalator. The results are going to be pretty wild, but your time lapses will also be really short. Here's one more fun time-lapse idea using a supermarket shopping cart. I put the X5 at the bottom of the shopping cart, still using that ND16 filter, and I used a flexible tube instead of a tripod to secure it in place. I recorded at 11K with the 2-second interval, and then I just went shopping. And here's the result. I was able to use that same shot twice, once facing each direction. Now here's the really important trick about reframing this particular shot. In the Insta360 Studio desktop app, I had to enable direction lock in order to keep the shot pointing forward in the shopping cart, because the shopping cart kept changing directions as I was turning corners. If I had not enabled direction lock, it would have looked like this. Okay, so those are some of my tips for using the Insta360 X5 and some of the fun new accessories from Insta360. Links to gear are in the description, and please do subscribe if you want to learn more from me. So cheers, and I'll see you next time.